Welcome to the EMEA Recruitment Podcast, brought to you in partnership with Operation Smile. We're hoping to raise vital awareness and funds for the work Operation Smile does around the world. Find out more or support this cause at emearecruitment.com/operation-smile. In this episode, we speak to Seamus Tardif, the Head of Growth at Jiva. He explains the reward in creating success for the business, as well as supporting millions of people in developing communities.
So hello, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the EMEA Recruitment Podcast in partnership with our good friends over at Operation Smile. As my colleague Rose has mentioned, we're delighted to welcome Seamus onto the podcast today. So hopefully you can hear me okay today.
Can hear you perfectly.
Excellent. That's good. Good news. Now, I know it's very difficult to have these podcasts and conversations at this time without mentioning the dreaded COVID word, So how's your life been in the last sort of year and a half, 2 years since the COVID situation came around? Have you managed to avoid it and stay safe and so on?
Yeah, it's so crazy to think that it's been sort of a year and a half, nearly 2 years now since this all began. To be honest, I think it's been like we've gotten through it fairly easily in some regards, right? Have been very lucky of not being personally impacted from a friends or family basis with people that have contracted COVID. Although, a lot more people have been far less fortunate kind of on that side, especially a lot of my colleagues with Indian connections, for instance, this year has been quite horrendous on their end. But for me, I think it's been quite interesting in that one of the things I always thought I'd never be able to do, for instance, was work from home. I always thought, working from home would be my nightmare. Would never get anything done, would be too distracted. And actually, I'm almost finding now the opposite of the truth, where on the occasions where we do go into the office, for instance, those become the times when I know I'm going to be highly distracted. And when I'm at home, I know that's the time that I can really get focused done. So I think that that's been a huge learning curve. The other side, of course, is on the people management side. You don't have as much time to kind of sit and have the one-on-one conversations that usually would, or those sporadic and spontaneous conversations that might happen. You now have to be, I guess, a lot more planned in some of those activities. But also means that from a thinking space, you need to be a lot more structured in terms of how you think about things. You don't have an hour to go through something with someone. You've really only got a 15 to 20-minute block amongst a day of meetings in order to be able to land your objective. So like all around, it's been kind of a fantastic experience of getting to grow professionally. A little bit of a daunting experience or upsetting experience for seeing how what my colleagues have had to go through, but feeling as well lucky that I've managed to pass through it relatively unscathed personally.
No, it's interesting, and I mean you mentioned there the working from home situation. I mean, I think it's a situation that's really the majority of people have been through, and I think the things you mentioned there about having the focus, more structure, more focus on the priority of the work that needs to be done, and I think, yeah, as you say, I think the a lot around time management and priority have really had a big impact on people's lives when you are working from home, because the diary can run away from you. I mean, certainly what I found with the network when this all started was that people were getting quite stressed because they were basically just having back-to-back video calls all the way through the day, and the day would just never really end. It would you'd never have a chance to do anything in between. But I think people have learned from that very well, and as you say, the learning from it is going to be hopefully invaluable moving forward.
Absolutely. I think the burnout side was a very real point of concern and consideration amongst the leadership team from the time I was at BCG, as well as the time that I've been working on Jiva, trying to control the consistent output requirements from a growing business whilst trying to balance people's sanity, right? But as you said, sort of overlaying on top of this is this inability to disconnect when you're kind of at home, right? Where in quote unquote the real world, or let's call it the old normal, you used to be able to have a physical disconnect from your space, and that would mark the departure psychologically for I'm in work mode to now I'm in relax mode. Without that sort of physical disconnect, you can find a lot of the time that meetings do run into the evening, or you just want to get one more thing done before you kind of pack up, and that can kind of creep up and creep up and creep up. And it's really important from a management perspective and people management and just, general, humility perspective, is to ensure that your team don't feel that pressure to stay on. And furthermore, that you are actively discouraging them from kind of working to crazy extremes. The best work gets done when you have a fresh mind. The worst work kind of happens after you become, more and more and more tired. And then that's just going to inevitably cause you to do rework later on. So it's certainly a major consideration from a productivity standpoint, but just a general well-being standpoint, ensuring that there is that disconnect there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, how, just out of interest, if you've got any hints or advice for the network of how you managed to get through that challenge yourself, as you say, it was a big challenge for everybody, I think, that disconnect between work and home life when you're at home. I mean, did you have any sort of rules in place with your family or personal rules in your head where it was, well, I finish work at this time and then I'm gonna put things to one side, or have a space in a certain room which was your office room, and then the rest of the house was your family time? Was there anything that you did around that way?
I mean, I don't know if I'm succeeding, but what I would certainly say is, yes, we've got a separate study that I've kind of claimed as my workspace, and I actually find now that I very rarely come in on the weekends, right? Unless something's kind of really pressing, or after a certain point, I don't really want to come back into this physical location inside the home, because it does sort of immediately have that triggering moment. Certainly every day ensure that at least 2 or 3 times I'm getting, this is going to sound really bad, 5 to 10 minutes where you're stopping, you're going out, you're having a conversation, in my case with my wife, but with your partner or children or housemates or whomever, just to kind of maintain that connection so that you're not sat there at a screen constantly. Making sure that there's dedicated time, say in the evening for us. We live by a canal, so we take a walk each evening, and that becomes our sort of decompressed time together. What I'd say is the harder part is to say at a reasonable time, 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock, or whatever that reasonable time might be, that switch off. Unfortunately, just because of the stage of business we're in, growing quickly as we are, some of those timelines are a little more flexible. But also, I don't have children who are additionally sort of demanding of time. I've got a very forgiving wife who, has sort of flexed her hours to better match mine so that we can maintain that quality. So I don't think there's necessarily a silver bullet for it. What I'd say is whatever you feel is not the minimum amount, that's wrong. It's whatever you feel is an adequate amount, or the non-negotiable amount, shall we say, of time that you need to have away from work and with your friends, family, roommates, housemates, whatever it happens to be, is kind of where you should draw that line. And I think that line shifts depending on who you are and what your situation is.
No, it's really true. And I mean, I think you mentioned your sort of relationship with your wife there. And I think it's a huge thing, because you mentioned also the way people are managed internally. And I think if you're able to have that balanced approach both internally within your work life and then, with the relationships with your family as well, then actually it works better than trying to put yourself under a ridiculous amounts of pressure and pushing that pressure onto other people, because then, as you mentioned earlier, you don't get the most productivity out of yourself or the team, and people don't enjoy things as much. And obviously, if you enjoy your life at home and at work, then it just naturally makes you more productive as well. So it sounds like you've got things well sorted out there, Seamus. And I think obviously you mentioned a bit about your past time at Boston Consulting, and now, as we mentioned before, you had a growth at Jiva. And I thought it'd be interesting to ask you a question about what it feels like to be the head of growth at Jiva at the moment.
Daunting, I think, is probably the first word. But look, in truth, it's an incredible experience. It's incredibly exciting. It's incredibly humbling. It's not every day that you have the opportunity to be able to help sort of millions of people who quite literally live at the bottom of the pyramid and providing them opportunities to be able to improve not just their livelihood, but the livelihood of their family and their livelihood of their communities. In that respect, every day that I go to work, it kind of becomes about, okay, how do we inch this business closer to being successful? Because with that success comes the success of millions of people kind of around the world who, from a very ancient supply chain, which is agriculture, haven't always been given those opportunities that a Euro and I have, or even opportunities that other people within developing nations have had who might live in more urban centers, for instance. So it's a really gratifying role. Additionally, like getting to work with just incredible team members and be able to help shape the vision and future of this business, the sort of the culmination of those makes it a really rewarding experience for me.
Hi everybody, it's Paul Thomas here. I hope that you're well and you're enjoying the podcast so far. Thank you once again for your continued support listening to the podcast. I just wanted to break into the recording to talk to you about a really exciting new partnership that EMEA Recruitment has along with Operation Smile. And as founder of EMEA Recruitment, it's an honour and a privilege to announce this partnership. Personally, I was born with a cleft lip and palate, so the mission of Operation Smile is something that I have a strong personal connection with. It's not an understatement to say that the dentists and surgeons that help me were life changers. It's not only about the actual operations that take place, the support and care post and pre-operation are beyond value, and from personal experience I can only say that I'd not be the confident, happy person I am today without this support. I want to help children experience the support and care and skill that I experienced on my journey, and hope that we can do this along with Operation Smile. Every 3 minutes, a child is born with a cleft lip or cleft palate, and the mission of Operation Smile is to provide help and support to these children through providing 6,000 medical volunteers across 80 countries who are dedicated to help these children with facial conditions, most commonly cleft lip and cleft palate. More than 200,000 children are born with a cleft every year, and they are often unable to speak, eat, socialise or even smile. However, it can take as little as 45 minutes and cost just €180 or 182 francs for Operation Smile to provide a child with life-changing surgery. Now, in partnership with Operation Smile, EMEA Recruitment is raising valuable funds and aiming to create 100 new smiles to support the organisation to provide free surgeries for children and young adults all over the world. Please help us by donating through the link in the bio, or get in touch to see how your company can help get involved too. For the moment, I'll leave you to carry on listening to the rest of the podcast, but if there's anything I can do in terms of answering any questions or finding out how you can help and support EMEA Recruitment and Operation Smile, then please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you once again and enjoy the rest of the podcast. I mean, is that something that you almost fell into, or at the start of your career, was it something that you wanted to work for a company that had this type of model where obviously you're helping millions of people, as you mentioned there? Is it something that just came around through circumstance, or is it something you've really always wanted to do?
So I think inevitably businesses need to understand that just going after profit alone not many people are going to tolerate that anymore, right? From a personal standpoint, both my parents work in aid work. My mum for the UN, my dad for World Vision. My stepmom is a refugee. My stepdad was a senior member inside the UN as well. I have grown up basically around this notion of needing to do your part in order to try and make the world a little bit better. And, better obviously can go on many different facets, right? Better in my mind means a little bit more fair, which is a little bit more equal opportunity for all. Where the path that they took was down, obviously, the sort of the not-for-profit, non-government organization route of working alongside policymakers in order to be able to institute at government levels. My view of it has been, in order for people to really, and this is going to sound a bit selfish, but in order for people to really buy into it, like there needs to be a bit of quid pro quo, right? Like there needs to be a bit of, I'm going to get something out of this as well. And so I think the power of corporates working on purpose-driven missions is that they can help contribute back to the economy. They can help drive fantastic financial returns, which in turn then fuel even more benefit for those who are less advantaged. So I guess that's kind of how I've brought my life together in terms of companies I work for have to be standing for something slightly bigger than this is a great way to make money. It has to be something around how do we provide new opportunities or create new opportunities such that we can then fuel cottage industries or give back to the community in some way or solve a fundamentally big problem for the world in general. That's kind of what really energizes me, the tackling of wicked problems. And Jiva is certainly on that path.
No, it's really interesting. I mean, because one of the things we find with nearly every guest we have on the podcast is that people are influenced by the people they spend most of their time with. And obviously, as you say, when you're growing up, spending that time with your parents working in the non-profit area, the conversations around the dinner table or chats you would have, these are all things that are slowly making their way into your mind and your approach. And I guess they've got to be pretty proud of what you're doing now, because following in their footsteps in some way on that side.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, I think they're very excited about this prospect of, I guess, a new way of thinking amongst companies. And obviously, following their footsteps, on that regard, absolutely, like they are definitely proud on that end. It came as a strange realization, actually, that so my mom is an anthropologist by training, and I sort of came to realize quite late, actually, that going through and doing strategic design with Digital Ventures at BCG was really digital anthropology. It was the study of human nature and how you can better build products and services to be able to match that. And that stemmed very much back from, as you said, my childhood and watching and growing up in the conversations that were around that table. So yeah, like I'm proud to have been able to follow in their footsteps, but be able to carve it out and do it in my own way, but still aiming for those same objectives that they were going for.
No, and it's good. I mean, you mentioned there one of the things that you spent time in investing and learning in is the way that humans interact and what makes humans tick. And you can just look at your LinkedIn profile to see all the great recommendations you've had from past and current people that you've worked with that really highlights your approach. And I mean, I know this is your passion, finding out about people and what drives and motivates them. So do you find there's a common denominator amongst us all, or is it really every individual is just that, just individual, or there are certain similarities we have?
Yeah. I mean, I think we are collectively very complex. Look, there are generally some similarities that sort of come to my mind, but it also depends on where you're located, right? Like so much of what makes people act and think and do in certain ways is based on their collective experiences, right? Which is where you have certain traits within nationalities, certain traits within different sports teams, for instance, because you become this sort of culmination of lived experience. But one thing that I personally think is quite universal is the resilience and adaptation of people, in that we're all driving towards kind of a common goal of improving our own situation, the situation of our friends and families. I think as people exist in this state of flux, right, we might take some tiny steps, or we might make sort of minute pivots, or we might make giant changes. But all of these are done to push ourselves or our families further. And if you can determine, I guess, from a business build standpoint, if you can determine what makes someone's idea of better, or understand what someone's idea of better actually is, then you can unlock sort of real value by enabling them on that path. And what I mean by what better is for them, better might be they fundamentally believe that music is the greatest thing ever. And so to better themselves and to improve their own situation alongside this path, they might learn to play an instrument or go to a conservatorium to further education. Better might be, in the case of farmers for Jiva, improving their situation is, how do I stop making the decision about, do I send my kids to school or do I purchase inputs? It becomes, how do I actually get enough money to be able to do both? And that's not a profit-seeking activity or a greedy activity. That's fundamentally of, I'm looking at the current allotment that we have in our life and how do we actually just take that next step? Because everyone is, I think in some way looking to take that next step. If you reflect kind of on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, with the top being self-actualization, the bottom being sort of the hygiene factors, depending on where you sit on that, each one of those steps is kind of an improvement of your current situation. So that's kind of, where I would draw the clear distinction. I think beyond that, it becomes a bit murky. If you really wanted to draw generalizations, I think you'd have a harder time of it because there's so many nuances that go into making people people.
No, and I mean, I think the resilience side of things that you mentioned there is nowhere more evident than the Olympics. So when we're recording this, as the Olympics is pretty much at its halfway point, and it's one of those things that you see these people on the podiums, and you just, I mean, for some of the events, you think you've got to recognize that it's 4 years worth of getting up at 4 or 5 in the morning, doing training, then going to a day job for most of these people as well. There's only a few of these individuals that are in the kind of category where they have sponsorship from Nike and so on, that so they're able to do this full time. And it's resilience is a huge thing. But I was just wondering, actually, what you find was the biggest challenge that people have taking what they know. So let's say they know they want to do this certain thing and actually putting it into action, because I suppose that's the toughest part of it. I think there's plenty of people who would love to be Olympic champion, but they're not going to then do all the actions that need to be done to get to that point. So how do you work with people on that side, to try and actually put their goals into action and push through the resilience side?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a great question, right? And I think if there was an easy answer, we'd both be billionaires by now. One of the biggest parts of that prevents people moving forward is this, self-induced inertia, where it becomes, I don't even know where to begin. How can I begin on this journey? And from my own experience with things that I've tried and from bits and pieces of the research that I've done kind of along the years, I think a lot of that also comes to putting the wrong figurehead in place of what you need to try and achieve, right? Everyone is kind of looking for that role model to be able to go towards. You need to be able to see, I guess, that 7 habit of effective people, right? Like of top performing people, start with the end in mind. If I can't see where I'm going to end up, like how will I ever actually, get there? A good example, I think, right now is this crazy hubris around, what it means to be an entrepreneur, right? In the very essence of the word entrepreneur, it's to do with driving out and starting your own thing, breaking new ground. Being an entrepreneur doesn't mean that you need to earn $165 billion like a Bezos, right? They are absolutely at the pinnacle of what it means to be. But if I was to try and set out now to achieve that goal of making $165 billion, there's no way I could even fathom where to start. So being able to break down to say, okay, well, what is kind of a realistic first step? What is a realistic first goal to be able to achieve with inside this? If you can find a way to be able to communicate that and make it tangible and not just a bullet point on a page, but rather an imagination that I can kind of conjure in my mind to go towards, then that is how you start to unlock that inertia. So that's kind of, I know that's a bit of vagary and, vagueness kind of around it. And it's because, one, it's a very big question, but I think people will be stuck at the start for a variety of reasons. But fundamentally, I think it comes down to just setting an incorrect objective for yourself.
No, I think it's interesting because it does go back to something you were talking about earlier on the focus side of things. I mean, these days it's so easy to get distracted. We have so many things trying to pull our attention away from the thing we're doing, whether it's social media, email, WhatsApp, phone calls coming in and video calls. And I think, to get to where you want to be, it's a step-by-step process, exactly as you've said. And it's just a case, I think, of combining some of the things you've spoken about today, having that focus, knowing what the key things are you want to do, and just making sure you've got the resilience to keep pushing through even when things are not necessarily working out as you want. Because I suppose if you've got the focus right and you're taking it day by day, then actually the good things will come. It just it takes time, really. And I think that's often, it's a big challenge that I think companies face when they are recruiting at the moment. I think a lot of people want to move up the career ladder probably faster than their knowledge and experience would currently be at. And so I think a lot of companies do have challenges on not just recruiting, but retaining people. And I guess we couldn't really have a podcast interview on the recruitment platform without asking the question about recruitment and people, because it's linking well to what you've mentioned there. I mean, when you're recruiting people for Jiva, or even from your former companies as well, I mean, what do you think the key steps are in order to get really good quality people and have a really efficient recruitment process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is something that a lot of companies struggle with, right? Like, you're not always going to get it right from the start, and even very successful, mature companies don't always get that right. I think for me, where it probably starts with is just being really clear on the type of personality and work traits that your top talent should have. I think fundamentally everyone is trying to recruit for top talent, regardless of whatever the position is. So if you can be, in your mind saying, okay, for me, an ideal person for this role, not necessarily background, but kind of person, exhibits these type of traits, that's a fantastic place to start. I think sort of beyond that, the next step in that for me is being realistic about what the job actually requires. Sort of reflecting this, I'm reminded of this job ad that I saw a while ago, which was requesting for 15 years social media experience. And I was thinking, where were they advertising? Was this on, MySpace and Bebo that they were originally on? Because certainly Facebook and Twitter were only just sort of, fledgling. So how can you request someone to have 15 years experience in this, relatively new field of marketing? I think being thoughtful around what the role is now, but being flexible in terms of where that role might evolve to. I posted a while ago this idea of, we're a talent-first organization, right? We hire the right person, and those people who are great talent, they will go and find work for themselves. They will expand that original role. And it starts off as kind of a fairly niche area. And you find that because of their drive and because of the way that they think, they're able to find problems on either side of them that also need fixing. And all of a sudden that role becomes a little bit further, it becomes sort of wedged open a little bit more. And that then gives them a bit more of a sense of ownership and excitement. So being able to be a bit flexible on that. I think one of the big things as well that I'm seeing right now, and you sort of mentioned yourself in terms of that structure and efficiency, recruitment isn't a wing it process, right? It's not I'll just post it and kind of see what comes back at me. It's about finding and targeting those specific people, but then having a really great process of interviewing that kind of sits behind it, right? You need to know the questions that you want to ask. You need to know the things that you're looking out for. It's a sort of disservice to the company to not have that process, but it's also a disservice to the candidates who come through and they get it a bit muddled by sort of what's going on if you don't have that. And that can be really basic, just as I'm always going to ask these 5 questions of these people, and I'm going to leave flexibility around sort of the interesting parts. But if you don't have that same 5, how do you evaluate people kind of fairly across these different areas? Another, I think, critical step further down that funnel is, involving those people who are going to be directly impacted by the hire. A lot of time you see that these conversations happen at management only levels, right? At DV, one of the things that we really ensured that we practiced was we had cross-functional interviews, we had partner levels, we also had levels from people who might report into that individual from a case team perspective. You need to know that sort of balance across these different things, because when you bring someone in, they can fundamentally change your culture. They can fundamentally change the output. So you want to be sure that each of these different people are, who could be impacted, each of these teams that might be impacted, get to have at least a partial say in terms of the candidates that are coming through, but also the people that end up getting that job around there. I think the very last thing that sort of comes to mind on this is, a lot of companies institute this probation period, right? But then they kind of use it as a bit of a box ticking exercise. The purpose of a probation period is kind of like an internship. You're bringing people in to understand, actually, are they the right fit? Can they really do this job? Or have we kind of got it wrong in this instance? Do we hire the wrong job for this person to do? The probation period, if used correctly, can help you identify very quickly whether this candidate is going to fly. And thus, I think, for companies who have these 1, 2, 3 month, 6-month probations, however long it needs to be, they should be looking at that saying, well, maybe we should be trialing people a bit more effectively here. Maybe there is a few people who are sort of on the fence about, but we want to give them a bit of flex. And we want to give them a bit of an opportunity to prove themselves. Or those people that we're really bullish on, like still put them through that rigor of, you still need to pass this probation rather than kind of tick the box on the other side. I don't know. Those are just some of my thoughts in terms of what it is. I'm sure that you'd have a much better understanding about what 100% makes a perfect process, but these are certainly some of the things that sit in my mind.
No, and it's really interesting. I mean, as you mentioned there, having the clarity on the person, the role from the start, so everything is clearly identified and the process runs smoothly from that point of view. I think, hiring into the culture rather than necessarily the specific role, I think is the right way of doing it, because I think if you get the person who's a cultural fit, then as you mentioned, they can still be a good hire, and you find out in the probation period whether the role is necessarily right for them, but they could still be a good person for the for the business. And I think a big part of that, as you mentioned as well, is getting the buy-in from the people that this role is going to have exposure to, not just the line manager and an interview of talent acquisition. It's more, what other people are going to be speaking to on a daily basis. They should have some exposure to these individuals through the process for the person who's on interview, but also I think for the benefit of the company as well. I mean, I think a company that used to do this very well was GE. Back in the day when they were the biggest company in the world and a company that a lot of people aspired to work for. They try to bring people in at fairly junior level, and then through their almost probation period, they would rotate individuals for through various different disciplines. They hired for the culture first, and then almost found the role for them once they'd joined. And obviously, not every company has the luxury of being the size or has the opportunities internally as a GE. But that type of model just worked really well and just meant they got some of the best talents in the market, who then stayed with them for a very long time. But as you also mentioned, these things don't always work out, even if you have almost a seamless process on the recruitment side. So I don't know, what do you feel is the real cost of the wrong hire?
Yeah. I mean, I guess on reflection there, right? I think first off, it's important to start with it. It's often that you've kind of hired the wrong job for that person, rather than necessarily the wrong person. There are very few truly bad candidates. You just may have kind of, selected a task for them that they are not going to perform as well at as someone else is, right? And maybe that's too optimistic a lens over it. But as you were talking there on GE, I was reflecting on Kim Scott's discussion around radical candor of sometimes it's just kind of the wrong job. The thing that you should have said to them early on is, this isn't the right job for you. You're great in another area, but let's kind of move you on. But if I think about, I guess, like the cost through time and consulting, you get to see sort of snippets of these things as you work through various companies or various teams. I think like misaligning like the job to the person has a couple of these sort of critical problems, right? One is that work doesn't get done, right? Or you end up kind of slowing momentum down. For smaller companies, obviously, this is devastating. For bigger companies, it goes a little bit more unnoticed, but it certainly creates, I think, a little bit more discontent amongst the team. If work gets done, incorrectly, right, it can cause lack of trust and lack of buy-in from teams that then interface or managers that then come in. And kind of at the best end of that, it becomes that rework component, right? I think as well, to that first point, it's a bit demotivating, right? Like, it's not just managers who can see when someone isn't performing in the role they need to. The team members can sit around and as I was saying on the Kim Scott thing, the opening story of that is around how people became quite fractious and the culture started to become quite toxic because there was a couple of members who they could all clearly see weren't right for the role that they were doing. but yet they were being passed over by, quote unquote, from management, right? So I think being mindful that it is those other teams that collectively will be able to look on and see when things aren't there, which then leads on to that sort of poor culture thing. I guess the last thing that comes to mind for me is on missed opportunities. And what I mean by missed opportunities in this instance is if you have someone in a role where the role isn't right for that person, the opportunities that may present themselves to a top quality candidate or talent within inside that same role, could be missed. And in kind of the pace of business these days, missing an opportunity might be the difference between meeting the quarterly target or not, or being able to expand to the next region faster or not, or being able to survive as a business or not. And so it's really important to keep those things in as best alignment as you can, so that you don't have the situations where things are passing by where another person in that same position may have been able to pick up and say, you know what, that's a golden opportunity. We should tackle it.
No, I think it's interesting because, again, the question of culture does come around, and I guess linking back to something we were talking about earlier with the home working, I think most companies now allow flexibility with people to work from home, but I guess the biggest challenge for a lot of businesses, as well as the people management, it is the impact on the culture of a business. If your office is only 25% to 50% full at any one time, and I guess, have you found that that's been the case within Jiva? And I suppose, is there any way that you found that can help when you're recruiting people to get them to really feel the culture if obviously the office isn't fully populated as it was before?
Yeah, remote culture I think it's a challenge that everyone's kind of working through right now, right? I would love to say we've cracked the nut on this, but I think people are dealing with things in kind of quite different ways. One thing that we do try and implement at Jiva and had brought this over when we were building the company at DV was trying to inject a bit of fun. And no one likes the term forced fun, but the reality is that if you're having a good time at work, your culture will follow, right? So where we try and drive on that are even just, small things like we have daily trivia that goes out sort of automatically through our Slack channels. At DV, we used to hold this as sort of a live presentation trivia. Or we do Airbnb experiences together as a company. Like a month and a half ago, for instance, we had 70 people dialing into a virtual safari just to bring people together, right? To have a shared experience. We have tried previously things like, the coffee catch up, applications and that sort of thing. But I think the challenge is in this world, if it's kind of not in the diary now, it doesn't happen because things will come and overlap and they'll step on each other's toes. And you can't always guarantee that you can have that free space for very long. So we found that sort of became a bit of a downfall. But having a couple of these sort of milestone events to sit behind where people can choose to either engage heavily or just sit there and participate as they might do in a real environment, right? Or rather in a non-virtual environment, where you might have people who are up there having a chat to whomever's presenting and those people who just kind of want to watch the show. You need to be able to allow that. And I think if you have too many of those sort of forced conversations, you're not necessarily catering for all types of people. So I don't have a clear answer on it because people for the last X many thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, have relied on face-to-face communication and being physically connected. It's only in these sort of few instances where you can really have a solid unified goal whilst being completely remote. Probably the best example that I've seen of virtual communities has actually been on Reddit, where, because there's so many different sub-branches, you can eventually find my people wherever that happens to be. And I think, if you had a look at Wall Street bets with the GameStop, increase beginning of this year, for instance, in AMC, that's like an amazing example of how a culture can kind of just erupt out of nowhere, completely virtually without anyone even knowing who each other are. But I think it's really hard to construct that. That's a very organic happening. So I don't have once again, I don't have a silver bullet. But I can say if you're bringing a bit more enjoyment, a bit more excitement for people, a bit more fun for people, casually opt in, opt out as you want, I found that to be the most effective.
No, again, it does come back to a theme that's running through the enjoyment, having fun, having the focus on the things you enjoy doing, and then other things tend to fit well into place. I think it's getting those foundations in place first, and then once all that's in place, the other good things start to happen, and so it's really interesting to get your thoughts on that. And I guess for the last question today, I thought I'd ask something that's I suppose completely off track from what we've been talking about already, so it's a bit random, but probably a question that your parents as well might be quite interested to hear your answer to, given what we've been talking about. So if you had the option where you could change the world, what would be the first thing that you would do?
For only I had a crystal ball. Look, I think dealing with the populace that I'm dealing with, right, which are, as I said, like people who are at the bottom of the pyramid, who don't have great access to technology. A lot of them are very new into the internet, even, to take a page out of Bill Gates's mind here, right? For me, I think it's like giving everyone a smartphone, like a 4G connection and unlimited data. And the reason I say kind of having those things in place is we don't know where the next Bill Gates or the next Zuckerberg or the next Bezos or the next Marie Curie is going to come from, right? But there is certainly a very large proportion of the world who lives in developing nations who don't have access to, to these things that we take for granted every day, right? We walk around with a supercomputer. But just imagine the potential, imagine the unlocks that would happen if they did. Years ago, I read this story about and I'm probably going to butcher the story now, read this story around a group of researchers who would put an ATM into a remote community in India. And they left it there to see what was going to happen. And it had a camera attached to it. And the first day, people sort of came up and they sort of looked at it. They didn't really know, like very cash-based economy, right? No real use for cards. And I'll fast forward to the end and then I'll come back to the middle. While I'll fast forward to the end is the end of the story 2 weeks later results in the professors who put this in, or the researchers put this in, received an email from the village, right? And why I go to that is the string of events that took place essentially went as this. The children worked out how to access the keyboard, how to access like the typing keyboard of the ATM machine. So they had to then work out how to get to the operating system. They had to then cross the threshold of learning some basic English. They then had to work out what was an email address and how do you actually get on there? How do you find the contact of this? And then work out how to construct an email in a language they didn't speak, using a system that was designed to withdraw money to people who they'd never met. And yet they managed to overcome all of these barriers to do it. Now, I think about the incredible feat of human ingenuity, of resilience, of adaptation that goes into that. Imagine if you gave them a system that was a pre-built supercomputer. Like, what amazing things could they potentially do kind of off the back of it? What changes would they make? And who better to form these amazing, changes for these people at the bottom of the pyramid than people who have experienced and lived on that side of things? So I think that's why, for me, I think we come down to a smartphone, a 4G connection, and unlimited data, and let's kind of see where the world goes from there.
No, I love that answer, and I like the way as well that it does relate back to something you also mentioned earlier, the resilience side of things. I think it all ties in very well with what you were talking about earlier as well. And I think it's been excellent to have you on the podcast today, Seamus. Really appreciated your time, and I know that the network will take a lot from this conversation as well. And obviously, when we promote the podcast, what's the best way that people can reach out to you?
So, I mean, drop me a line via LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there. And, if it works out from there, like happy to have a call as well via Zoom. I think that's kind of, what everyone's doing these days. So drop me a line and we can set something up.
That sounds good. And from what we've mentioned, it's got to be something that's diarised and at a certain time. I think that's the challenge everyone's having. So that's it. No, perfect. Really good to speak to you, Seamus. Enjoy the rest of the day. And thank you again for all these great insights for myself and the network.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Thanks, Seamus. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast episode. If you'd like to reach out to Paul or myself, please feel free to send a connection through on LinkedIn. And if you'd like to listen to previous episodes of the podcast, you can find them all at our website, www.emearecruitment.eu.